4 qualifiers down, 4 qualifiers left to go. We have 8 automatically qualified decks, 6 potential wildcard options that will also be added depending on how big a championship I want to have. And this time, if I polled the community on which 2 decks out of these 16 they thought would advance, the community would have gotten it right, because Itty Grims and Werewolf Mouties, 2 very popular strong decks in the Smash Up community, delivered and took the top 2 spots in this qualifier. I'll talk about the Itty Grims first. They smacked down their first 3 opponents pretty easily. Princess Knights put up what looked like a very good fight, but it was also obvious Princess Knights were playing 2 good games, but they were hopeless. Steampunk MOE, again, delivered in the second round to also be undefeated in the third round, and still got spanked against Itty Grims. And after 3 rounds, Itty Grims were 6-0, with 2 of their opponents being 4-0, except against Itty Grims. The final round had Ape Pirates making it into the wild card with, in the very final game, a crazy performance. Itty Grims, playing second, got a slightly slow opening, where the problem was that they didn't have enough minions in hand. They actually had Charming Princess in play with Teamwork in hand, and so they could grab a Prince Charming anytime they wanted, but they didn't have more minions in hand to do anything with the Prince Charming. And if I back up to the first couple turns, Ape Pirates opened the game able to play First Mate shielding with another First Mate and another shielding back in their hand. They drew the electric Pokemon removal. That's the only card in Itty Grims that will deal with a shielded First Mate. And then on their second turn, they just straight up played a second First Mate and their second shielding, asking Itty Grims, do you have Recall Critter in the first 7 cards that you drew from your deck? And the answer was no, they did not. That First Mate would then, on the next turn, get juiced up, later on, get Cyber Evolution, grow to 13 power before the first base break, which so happened to be Volcanic Island. And when that happened, they broke and won Volcanic Island, moved their First Mate off to another deck, revealed the 2 bases from Volcanic Island, because that's Volcanic Island's base ability. One of them was Factory, and that's where their Titan went. After their second base break, during the same end of the same turn, they played Full Sail to move 14 power worth of minions over to Factory. This was enough that after their First Mate bounced to Factory as well, they had a total of 27 power for a Factory solo at the end of a triple break. So the victory points they scored from this triple break were 3-1 from Volcanic Island, something from the second base, I don't remember what second base it was, and then 7 unanswered victory points from the Factory solo. And that is why they were able to score the disgusting winning score of 18 victory points to 5 over a previously 7-0 opponent in the final game of this qualifier. So 8 Pirates had a crazy hand after taking advantage of a slow Itty Grims start, and that's why Itty Grims failed to go 8-0. As it is, they're actually at the bottom of the 3 7-1 decks, because even though this was a 16-deck qualifier versus the first 3 12-deck qualifiers, we had a tremendous amount of draws in the middle of the field, which meant that overall, Itty Grims' tiebreakers didn't look all that great. Also didn't help that Itty Grims' 2 previous opponents, who were still in the final round, both lost their final round matches. So that was Itty Grims' run. Now I'm going to go back and talk about the decks that didn't do so well. Spider Ants came from the Marvel Elimination Bracket, where it was way down here at the bottom somewhere. Ant Spiders here. They beat Changerbot Kree, but Changerbot Kree without the Changerbot Titan. Tied with Shield Warriors. Tied with Shield Robots. Tied with Avenging Kree. And at that point, they had lost too many games in the process of getting 3 draws, and the Avenging Kree advanced over them on tiebreakers. But the thing is, they made draws with 3 pretty good-looking decks, so I thought Ant Spiders looked like a pretty good Spider-Verse deck. I still think Ant Spiders is a pretty good Spider-Verse deck. It's just that in a qualifier consisting mostly of decks that are Class A decks that I think have good partners, being a good Spider-Verse deck is not going to be good enough unless the Spider-Verse have an S-Class partner, and they're not allowed an S-Class partner in this tournament. So Spider Ants went down in 4 straight games, losing to Itty Grims, which is no knock on them. But then the problem was they faced Super Kitties. They were facing a strong superheroes deck while just not having any cards that can remove a mild-mannered citizen. Superheroes are primarily a weak faction because when you remove their mild-mannered citizens, they don't do all that much. And then also because they're a little bit slow to reload after scoring a base break, because they first have to put their minions on the bottom of the deck and then either have a mild-mannered citizen stick around to the start of their next turn or find a way to shuffle their deck. Until they've done both those things, they aren't going to be redrawing their 5s after breaking a base. Sumo Fairies. Again, I've been trying to look for a way to make Sumo good. I think at this point I have to admit Sumo is not Class A. Sumo is, I'm pretty confident at this point, going to be a Class B deck. They drew with Horse Dragons, and Horse Dragons were sort of an established pretty good deck, so that's okay. They have some burst from Fairies. They have some good things they can do. They have the control cards from Fairies. They have the right bones to be a good Sumo deck. Dwarf Orcs was a direct matchup against another slow Bruiser deck, and what happened is, partially because Sumo Fairies doesn't have the destruction to compete for control of the treasure deck, destruction decks that are facing dwarves can try to get their hand on Wand of Dowsing to hit the dwarves with a treasure deck reshuffle, empty out the treasure discard pile, and disable the dwarf cards that return cards from the treasure discard pile at some point mid-late in the match, which often just makes dwarves non-functional for a base or two, and frequently wins a game. That assumes they're able to get their hands on Wand of Dowsing, but when they can, it often wins the game. Sumo Fairies don't have cards that let them kill monsters if they want to compete for the chance of picking up Wand of Dowsing and screwing over the dwarves. They have to do it off of base breaks, which is a little bit slower way of doing it. And in this case, Dwarf Orcs over time was just able to generate more power over time than the Sumos, because dwarves get better over the course of a game. Sumo Fairies aren't particularly adept at speeding up a game, and for that reason, Dwarf Orcs played the same game better and demonstrated that Sumo Fairies are just not that great of a bruiser deck. Samurai Plants was the third deck that went down in the second round. They had previously drawn with Kree Warriors, which turned out to be a pretty good warrior deck, I think. Warriors, I think, used to be A-class, might not so much be A-class anymore. I think Warriors may end up landing in B-class, because they haven't been that successful so far. Samurai Plants almost won the first game of this match, only losing it. As a matter of fact, I believe they lost the game to Wishing Ring after tying the score. And then Samurai Plants went in against 8 Pirates. Well, you know, 8 Pirates got a win over Itty Grims. 8 Pirates is a pretty good and pretty popular deck. Samurai Plants is a good enough deck. It's a decent deck, but not at Class A level. Samurai Plants, I think, may in fact be a competitor in Class B, but I don't think either of the factions that make Samurai Plants up are actually Class A. Final deck to go down in the second round was Horse Dragons, which was a previously established pretty good deck from me playing a bunch of games with it, 5-6 years ago. It hasn't aged that well. I think specifically horses have not aged all that well. The newer Rush factions do better than horses, and on top of that, horses got nerfed by some rule changes. Specifically, Glimmer. No, I'm sorry, it's not Glimmer. They're Horses 4. Horses 4 requires you to play a minion there every turn rather than giving you the option to just stick 2 minions on a base and draw a card every turn unless your opponent aggressively breaks that base or removes one of your minions. Losing the ability to set up that 2-minion card farm makes horses a little more one-dimensional, makes them have to rush things a bit more. If they get a card farm, they have to constantly keep pushing that base towards breaking, which is really not something they want to be doing. In any case, Steampunk MOE turned out to be the better deck head-to-head. Steampunk MOE has a nice little synergy working with it, which is Rotary Slug Thrower makes everything 4 power, which is the amount that you need in order to sacrifice them for a victory point with acceptable losses. And this can be important in getting to multiples of 4. Really, though, Steampunk MOE is one of those funny decks where I wasn't really sure how it did as well as it did in the first 3 rounds. And I had to admit I wasn't entirely surprised when it got 2-0'd in the final round. Yeah, and they beat Dwarf Orcs. They absolutely slaughtered Dwarf Orcs in the first game, but sort of barely beat them in the second game. The decks that went down in third round. Kree Warriors made a draw with 8 Pirates. They went out with 3 draws, and this was the 3 draws business happened with Kree Warriors, Polynesian Avengers, Ninja Spies, Greek Wizards, Super Kitties. Yeah, that's 5 decks that ended up on 3-3 after 3 rounds. Now, not all of them were 3 draws. Super Kitties were loss, win, and draw. But I really had a tremendous amount of draws in this particular qualifier. I think I succeeded at coming up with a whole bunch of pretty good decks. The problem is a lot of these pretty good decks don't have a lot of ways to interact with the opposing deck. Greek Wizards are a solitaire deck. AK Roamers are pretty much a solitaire deck. Polynesian Avengers aren't quite a solitaire deck, but they don't have too many ways to interact with the opposing deck. Kree Warriors, they have a few ways to interact with the opposing deck, but it's mostly going to be just playing monsters to tank up a base. So there's just a lot of non-interactive stuff going on in this qualifier. And the thing about decks, non-interactive decks that are pretty good decks, is that when they get ahead, they often just win because they're good enough to win without having a way they can turn defensive. On the other hand, when these decks are behind, they don't have a way to turn defensive, and so if the opposing deck is also good, they tend to just lose. And this means you get a lot of cases where the deck either wins or loses based on a coin flip, or the deck that plays first collects a sizable advantage and wins the match. Like Ninja Spies versus Polynesian Avengers, how good the Spies Titan are is made a big difference in this matchup. When Moon 03 collected momentum, they were the faster deck. When Moon 03... In the second game, Moon 03 had to be played second as the second turn because Polynesian Avengers had taken the first turn. And it also just didn't have a good base to land on. They weren't getting that extra power every turn as efficiently on a base with a 2VP gap where they had a lead. All of that led to the situation where the first player advantage made a fairly large difference in this particular matchup. Greek Wizards versus Super Kitties. The Greek Wizards got their combo off in game 1. In the second game, they were not getting their combo quite as fast. Super Kitties had ways to play defense. Greek Wizards did not. Super Kitties' defense did not matter in the first game because Greek Wizards just went and soloed a base out of nowhere by going off with their combo. Also, Greek Wizards, given an extra turn, are a little better at getting their minions to the 4-power breakpoint that Kitties have to care about, and they can catch mild-mannered citizens while they're still mild-mannered citizens via tempo. In the second game, when the MMCs started coming out turn 1, they were always going to have time to turn into 5s. That running theme took place in a bunch of first and second round matches at all, and this is why I had only 5 decks out of 16 after 3 rounds that had at least 4 wins out of 6. And as a result, I had to bring the Polynesian Avengers up with a 3-3 record, despite it being a 16-deck qualifier where I'd figured I would have 6 decks with a winning record. As it so happens, in the final round, Princess Knights were rewarded for having the best tiebreaks out of the 4-2 decks by getting paired down against Polynesian Avengers, and a very interesting thing happened to the Knights in this round. If you recall the Apes versus Fairies matchup, why is this matchup so hopeless for Apes? It's not just that Fairies have a card that counters Apes and Tinks. It's that Fairies have a 4 of minion that counters the Apes by stealing their enchantments away from them. Polynesians have a 4 of minion called Moai, which prevents opposing minions from moving the Moai to a different base or moving their minions to that base. Now, Knights have a bunch of actions that give them something cool when they move a minion to the same base as that action, and when there's a Moai on that base, Knights either need a partner faction that can get rid of a Moai, or they can just flip the table and lose the game. Princesses made this even worse. Princesses can destroy 2-power minions. Moai has 3-power minions. Moai is a 3-power minion. On top of that, Princesses have a bunch of movement cards. Normally, when you play the Polynesian Voyagers, you want to bring extra bases into play to have a 4 or 5 base setup. This 4 or 5 base setup allows you to create some gigantic Wayfarers and just overwhelm your opponent with huge minions. Also allows you to use Growth of the Tribes or something of the Tribes, 4+6, +8, +10 power on a single minion. Generate some big bursts off your big minions. In this matchup, if you are facing Knights and the Knights partner faction does not have a way to destroy a Moai, do not play extra bases as Polynesians. Just get Moai on 2 different bases. Play them on bases after your Knight's opponent commits a Knight's action to that base. And the Knights just can't do anything. The Knights have a whole bunch of dead cards in their deck, and they just become a non-functional faction. So Polynesian Avengers was able to quite comfortably win both games against Princess Knights, who had previously looked like a really good deck, and that put Polynesian Avengers into the potential wildcard list, despite being marked as eliminated with a 3-3 record after 3 rounds. I already talked about how 8 Pirates, despite having the worst tiebreakers and getting punished for that with an Itty Grimm's pairing, managed to make it to 5-3 with really good strength of schedule by stealing a game from Itty Grimm's. And that brings me to the final match of the 4th round between Steampunk Masters of Evil and the Werewolf Mounties. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit and go to how they got to this round. Steampunk MOE beat Dwarf Orcs by being faster to get there before the Dwarf Orcs. They were barely faster in the second game, but they were faster. If either of these games had lasted 1 or 2 turns longer, Dwarves continually get better over the course of the game. MOE do get better over the course of the game, but they get better based on how many victory points they have. So in a faster game, they're getting better faster. Dwarves would have won game 2 if the game took a little longer. Round 2, Steampunk MOE beat up Horse Dragons, partially because MOE can have some nice big minions. Steampunk can add burst power without playing an extra minion, and this makes them good at countering Imperial Dragons. On top of that, Steampunk does have Dome. I swear I am so terrible at remembering my full card names today, but they've got their Ornate Dome, which can blow away some dragon actions. Third round, Steampunk MOE got slapped by Itty Grims, but so did everyone else against 8 Pirates, so that's not much of a knock on them. Now, Werewolf Mounties, I had played them before. When they had to face at least one S-Class faction, I was not impressed by the Werewolf Mounties, because the S-Class factions just surgically used base breaks to take out Northern Mover, or develop fast enough to contest playing the Werewolf Titan in the first place, and Werewolf Mounties weren't really able to get their engine going reliably, or after their engine went going, the opposing S-Class faction found a way to remove the Titan from play, remove the engine from play, and Werewolf Mounties had to start all over again. In A-Class, that was not the case. Their opponents are not fast enough to stop them from bringing it out. Greek Wizards were able to steal the second game, where Werewolf Mounties played first in the first round, by the fact that Greek Wizards, on a good draw, are really, really fast. Second round, Ninja Spies just barely survived their first game against Werewolf Mounties, and Werewolf Mounties was sitting on 2-2 with must-win games coming in. Ninjas have a good matchup against Werewolves because Werewolves' best minion for breaking bases tends to sit at 3 power on their opponent's turn. Ninjas are great at targeting 3 power minions. Spies are less good against Werewolf Mounties because when werewolves break a base, they can often engineer all their minions being 5 power or higher, and ice out the base is not enough. If they can't do this, they can often make sure all their minions are 4 or bigger to ice out Live and Let Chum, as well as the Hidden Ninja plus Tiger Assassin combo, even if they can't stop Hidden Ninja plus Ninja Master. Third round, Werewolf Mounties drew the Astronite Roamers, and the AK Roamers are a pretty good solitaire deck, but Werewolf Mounties had a comparable burst capacity, base breaking capacity, to what the Astronite Roamers could do. However, the Werewolf Mounties also had a little bit better movement capacity in order to set up slowly if they needed to, and they had access to removal. Because of these combinations, the Werewolf Mounties could just play a more flexible game, both games, and manage to break their opponent's serve in the first game, win the second one. That brought them to 4-2, and this is where we get our final match of the last round between 2-4 and 2 decks. And you know how I described that Werewolf Mounties had more removal plus better ability to spread out with more burst? Yeah, I mean, Steampunk MOE does actually have pretty good movement with Zeppelin, but Werewolf Mounties was able to target break bases that had Zeppelins on them, and that made Steampunk MOE a bit of a stick in the mud. And Werewolf Mounties turned out to be just the better deck both games. Even though the first game was a 16-18 score, it did not feel close. Werewolf Mounties was more agile in terms of how it could take a wider variety of positions, make a wider variety of different decisions. MOE does have removal, but they've got one card that wants to hit a 5+ minion in order to get a victory point, and 2 cards that hit a 3. Werewolf Mounties were often able to use the fact that they had 2 +1 to all minions at this base, actions played on bases, 1 from each of their factions, in order to claim the upper hand. Oh god, I swear I'm getting the wrong name for that, but you know, the remove a minion of power 3 or less in Masters of Evil, not a very effective card, And werewolves removal scales with the size of their own minions, so they were able to use it efficiently to take out multiple minions with Let the Dog Out, or take out a big minion anytime they need to take out a big minion, without much regard for whether Rotary Slug Thrower was sitting in play or not. And that just made them the better deck. So at the end of this qualifier, we had Itty Grims winning the qualifier with a 7-1 record, which was almost 8-0, except for 8 Pirates having a lucky second game, Werewolf Mounties making it through with a 6-2 record, and Polynesian Avengers and 8 Pirates both making their way onto the potential wildcard list with excellent final round performances. That and me, for some reason, having a day when I'm terrible at remembering card names. But this is a couple days after I finished. Let's look at Qualifier 5. I have some proxy cards for using the Beauty and the Beast mechanics, which is going to allow me to bring in a couple half Disney decks into this 5th qualifier. I want to get these rolling ahead of time because with an 8 faction expansion, that's going to be a lot of potential decks that I have to check. Partially because with new factions, I don't know what works well with them yet. And so I'm going to have a lot more misses than hits when it comes to guessing what the best partners will be for Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, all of these different Disney factions. So as a result, I have Mages, Beauty and the Beast, and Zombies, Beauty and the Beast. And at this point, this is where I'm partially dropping the no 2 copies of the same faction rule. I want to be trying these Disney factions with established, successful factions that are likely to be Class A factions. Stuff like Zombies, Werewolves. I'm trying Mage and Wizard specifically with Beauty and the Beast, but I'm going to be trying a bunch of these with the best partners that are legal. And a lot of the best partners that are legal just so happen to be present in all of these qualifiers already. So I'm saying I can have 2 zombie decks if one of them is paired with a Disney faction. I can have 2 copies of the same Disney faction, because otherwise I'm not giving the Disney factions enough of a chance to compete in the Class A Championship later on. Looking at Qualifier 5, I've played one game. It was a very one-sided game, and I have to say I think Fairy Dragons is probably the top seed in this qualifier. The other Qualifier 5 top seeds, I would say, Steampunk Knights looks interesting. Horse Plants, I faced the Horse Plants actually in the first 1v1 tournament held at Gen Con in the final round, and before I got to face them with the ridiculously overpowered Elder Geeks, they had not even lost a single base in their first 4 rounds. So this deck definitely deserves a look. Now, horses have aged poorly, but Horse Plants are a pretty nasty deck. They have such fun synergies as Venus Mantrap basically searches for a 3 instead of a 2 via using the Horse 2 power minions plus 1 power from having another minion at this base. Plants can search for Sea Star with their Sprout as long as they have another minion at that base, and get an extra minion play at the start of the turn to just land a very nasty burst. Horse Plants can accelerate very effectively. Some of the rest of these decks. Shapeshifter Critters is a strong deck, although I have to say you've got to be really careful with your Mimic management, because Gotta Get 'Em All will only shuffle one of your 3 Mimics back in your deck, and usually you want 1 Mimic in your discard to bring back with Recall Critter, and the other 2 in your deck to potentially be drawn or searched for. Ninja Cowboys, I did want to try a removal faction with Cowboys to try to sort of cheap win duels by just killing the enemy minion. Kitty Wizards, decent. Zombie Explorer is another top seed here. Zombies are a good faction. Explorers are a good faction. Zombies give you good enough minion supply to help make sure that explorers can afford to play cards after a base break as extra minions and not run out of minions. Elder Teddies are probably going to be the last Elder Things deck I try. I'm feeling like, again, Elders are definitely an above average faction, but I think they're a B. Princess Shield. We're going to keep giving princesses some shots at this, but realistically, like, yeah, they've gotten exploring princesses through, but I think at this point I'm starting to say princesses are worse Avengers. And I'm not sure how they stack up against knights, but knights might be better than princesses too. Sinister Werewolves. This is like, if you want Sinister 6 to have a deck that might work in Class A, Werewolves are their partner that will do it. However, they still have to be a little careful about inadvertently breaking and losing bases, but much less so than with any other partner than Werewolves. Either of the Beauty and the Beast decks could turn out to make it out of this qualifier, but I haven't played Beauty and the Beast at all. I don't know how good they are. Steampunk Knights are potentially scary because Knights can search for a steampunk action, which is huge. Steampunk suffer from the problem that if they don't draw either Agromotive or Rotary Slug Thrower early, they might end up sitting on their mechanics with their mechanics not being broken. And those are the potential top seeds I'm thinking of. Fairy Dragons, Steampunk Knights, Zombie Explorers, and Horse Plants. I won't be surprised if 2 of those 4 decks come out winning this qualifier, but of course the games have to be played. That's my summary of Qualifier 4, my predictions for Qualifier 5. Hopefully when I give my Qualifier 5 summary, my brain is working a little bit better and I don't forget card names as much as this time. But I suspect that will be the case. In any case, happy smashing, everyone, and I'll see you when I finish my next Qualifier.